Welcome back, guys. So today we will be looking at some alone at night stories. I hope these scare you and terrify you. I know Mr. Midnight is not here and you miss him, but he will be here soon, do not worry. And I want you to always remember, the darkness always follows. Bad things come in threes, they say. I think it's true. Last month I had put my dog down. A week later, my boyfriend suddenly broke up with me. We had been together for almost 4 years, and he was even talking about getting married. Then when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I got fired from work. I shut myself in my room and didn't go out for 2 weeks. The only thing that gave me the strength to get back up again was my art collection. It was the only thing that accompanied me through the difficult times. Soon, I managed to find a new job, albeit it was located very far from my home. It was a 30-minute bus drive and then 20-minute walk to my apartment. That was pretty much the only downside. It's scary walking home alone at night, probably even more so for women. I often worked overtime, and by the time I got off the bus, it would be around 9 p.m. 20 or so more minutes of walking meant that I would get home near 9:30 p.m. In December, when it got dark by 5 p.m., it was pretty dangerous. I always walked as fast as I could and held my keys between my knuckles. The other hand was always in my coat pocket, ready to grab the pepper spray. For a couple of weeks, nothing ever happened. Last night, however, was different. I worked later than usual, so by the time I got off the bus, it was almost 10:30 p.m. I shivered and scrunched up my shoulders. It was minus 15 degrees, and I couldn't wait to get home and snuggle underneath my covers. My face was starting to itch. It always got worse in cold weather. I probably needed to buy some new lotion. Lost in thought, it wasn't until 10 minutes later when I finally noticed the extra sound of shoes crunching on snow behind me. Someone was following me. I walked faster. The footsteps quickened. I gripped my keys tightly and looked back. It was a man, about 6 feet tall. Most of his face was obscured by the shadows, but I saw a brief flash of white teeth. "Hey baby, where are you going?" he called out to me. I turned around and started running. I knew he was following me and couldn't let him follow me home. Gasping for breath, I blindly turned into a smaller side street. The street lights started flickering violently, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. Shiz. It was a dead end. I was trapped. I turned around and faced him. The street lights stopped flickering and stayed on. As he walked closer to me, I saw his face more clearly. He was a handsome-looking man, around mid to late 20s. His blue eyes sparkled, and he gazed at me hungrily. His hair shone a dark copper under the streetlight. I slowly put the keys in my pocket and tightened my grip on the pepper spray. He was almost in front of me now. I took a step back, and his lips twisted into a devilish grin. He lunged at me, and at the same time I whipped out this pepper spray. Clack! He knocked it out of my hand and grasped my shoulders. "Why are you in such a hurry, my love?" he hissed in my ear. I shoved him backwards, and he staggered back a few steps. Startled by my strength, he eyed me warily. His eyes widened as I caressed my own cheek. I felt the skin below my ear and tugged, gently pulling the mask off my face. The 22-year-old woman's skin was so soft and tight as I delicately folded it up and put it in my purse. He stared at me in disbelief. What? You're a man? How? His voice trailed off when he saw the knife. He screamed and tried to run, but tripped and fell heavily onto the snow. As I made my way towards him, I rejoiced at the new addition to my art collection. Before I start the story of what happened to me while I was walking my dog tonight, I want to give a little background of myself and where I live. Okay, so I live in the city, not a big city by any means, but a city nonetheless. And if you have ever lived in the city, you'll know that things work a little different here than small towns like the one I grew up in. Luckily for me, the place where I live is pretty tame. At least, that was what I thought. You see, I've been living here for 2.5 years, and I haven't really had any problems with the place. Aside from the occasional weirdo catcalling me, or the drunks coming out of the bars on Friday or Saturday nights. Not much happens too often around here, even though I technically live in the shadier part of town. I still haven't seen or heard much. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that I have a rather large dog, Windsor, that goes particularly everywhere with me. He's really a big teddy bear, but people are afraid of him because of his size. So long story short, whatever the hell happened tonight was definitely a first. It's been warm and beautiful out lately, so I've been trying to make up for our winter of staying inside by taking Windsor out on long walks every day. However, today was especially hot, and since Windsor is pushing 9 years old and has a heavy black coat, I didn't think that he would do very well in the heat today. So I decided to take him out after sunset. Big freaking mistake. The walk actually started out quite nice. I had my headphones in, the sun was still setting over the hills, and the streets were nicely illuminated. Nothing was out of the ordinary for the majority of the walk, until we decided to head home. Instead of doing my normal loop down through the park and back up along the main street, I decided to do a shortcut and make my way past the museum that's near my apartment. This museum is quite large and has paths all around it as well as streetlights, and I've never had a problem here before. Although, perhaps I just never noticed anything before. You see, I took my headphones out halfway through my walk so I could hear my surroundings better. And I'm really glad I did, because I probably wouldn't be alive right now if I didn't. I was rounding the corner of the museum where there are rows of trees on either side, and as soon as I rounded the corner, I had this strange feeling of being watched. Typical, I know, but it's true nonetheless. I stopped for a second and looked around me, but shrugged to myself when I didn't see anything. I did take note of how dark it was behind the trees, though, as well as the faint sound of a crackling twig in the darkness, and picked up my pace just so I could get the hell out of there. There was probably nothing more than a squirrel or a raccoon back there, I thought to myself, but it was still better to be safe than sorry. That was when Windsor stopped. Usually Windsor might stop if someone is nearby. More often than not, he just wants to be petted by passerbys. But there was no one around, and when I pulled on his leash, he didn't budge. I looked down at him. I could see the fur on the back of his neck standing up and his lips curling up to show his teeth as he stared into the trees at nothing. "Come on, bud," I said uneasily, swallowing hard as I tried to convince myself that he had just stopped to spot a squirrel or a cat in the trees. But I didn't believe myself. Deep down, and he wasn't budging. That was when I saw them, a pair of large yellow eyes, standing probably 8 feet off the ground, staring at me from the darkness. I was completely frozen in fear and felt almost mesmerized by the gaze of those eyes. I know it sounds weird, but I almost felt compelled to go closer. When Windsor started growling, however, I snapped out of it. Windsor still wouldn't budge when I pulled on him, and I wasn't just about to drop his leash and leave him behind. As I stood there, struggling to get my dog to come, I particularly pissed my pants at the sound of screeching coming from the trees as well as this strange sound. It wasn't human or any animal I've ever heard. It sounded almost like laughter, menacing and cold. I've got goosebumps now just thinking about it. I don't know if it was from sheer adrenaline or what, but in the heat of the moment, I managed to pick up my 100-pound dog and run at effing breakneck speeds toward my apartment. And I didn't stop until I was back on the main strip, where I plopped Windsor down on the grass and nearly kneeled over. As I was doubled over, panting like I had just run a marathon. Windsor started wagging his tail and licking my face as though nothing had ever happened. I quickly made it back to my apartment, where I locked the door and went straight to my room without saying a word to my roommates so I could post this here. I'm hoping that someone here can give me some input or whatever the hell just happened to me, or what that thing was. So yeah, I'm not going out at night by myself anymore. So I live in Sweden, really cold place, rainy and chill. I'm home alone very often because my sisters are out with friends and my parents work. I remember this night very clearly because I still shiz my pants when I think about it. My parents were working in the night shift and my sisters were staying over at a friend's house. So I'm alone with my little cat, and he's very protective. So I laid in my room watching a movie. My TV is right next to the door, so I can see the hallway. When I see someone pass the effing door, like a shadow or something, right then my cat started to hiss and shiz. I freaking jumped out my bed and took my fancy sword with me. Yes, I'm a very geeky girl, and slowly walked out of my room. I don't know why, but the lights were turned off in the living room and the doors were closed to all the other rooms. So I hear someone breathing right next to me. So I freaking swing my sword and hit nothing. I hear a small laughter and my cat ran the F away and hid. I yelled at whatever was there to come forward and stop effing around. Silence for a few minutes, then I feel a cold breath on my neck and a very silent whisper. You really want that? This happened 15 years ago. I haven't told my parents about it, and I don't think I ever will. I grew up in a very small town in Wisconsin. Being the weird kid, I never had many or any friends. I was a young atheist in a Catholic school, and I was always fascinated by the dark side of humanity. Of course, in predominantly Catholic town, it was very difficult for me to gain the approval of others around me. Scary movies and Stephen King kept me company for most of my childhood. However, I did find ways to entertain myself other than the confines of my own home. This town was one of those places that is often described as somewhere you can raise your kids. and no one ever locked their doors, whether they were home or not. A town that only stretched 1 square mile and had a population that peaked at 3,000. Everyone knew everyone's business and on a first name basis. Sometimes during the years of 8 to 11, late at night after my parents were long asleep, I would grab a Halloween wig and disguise myself so that I could walk around town alone. My mother had given me my grandmother's dagger because I thought it was so cool. It was a sheath with a clip on it, and I thought it was totally awesome. So I always took that, just in case. In my ignorant, childlike mind, I thought that no one would possibly ever recognize me, that I would be safe from harm, until the last night that I would ever walk the streets at night on my own. It was a warm summer night, and I started down my street towards the river, wearing my wig with my baggiest clothes and my dagger in the waistband. Overly confident, ready for my adventure, I was never easily spooked, and I knew every possible route and every nook in the town. I cut through the playground of my Catholic school and turned down the road towards a library. By now, I was only a few blocks from my house, but it seemed really far to me at 11, especially at night with no one around. I crossed the street towards the river, and as I looked to each side, I caught a shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye. Almost too afraid to look, but stupid enough to not run, I turned around and saw nothing was there. Just as I thought, freaking myself out, I kept going towards the river, which was at the bottom of a steep hill, but I was now getting uneasy. As I ran down the hill, heading to go under the bridge, I swore that I could hear the sound of feet on the pavement, not far behind me. Now I was really getting freaked. I got to the bottom of the hill and quickly turned around. I saw the top of someone's head as they were ducking down behind the pillar on top of the bridge. I didn't know what to do. I froze there in my steps, heart pounding, eyes welling up. I reached to my waistband where I always carried the dagger. It wasn't there anymore, but I knew that I had grabbed it. I dropped it along the way somewhere. My blood froze and I was shaking beyond control. I thought I could hear the sound of heavy breathing above me. I decided now it was time to run. Someone was definitely watching me, without a doubt. I ran up the hill and back across the street towards the playground. As I ran through, I dared not look back, but I could sense this presence was not far behind me. The breathing was getting heavier, and there were sounds of shoes hitting the pavement between my own footfalls. As I turned the corner to my street, I couldn't help but look back. Just as I looked, the figure was moving behind the building that I was now in front of. I backed up against the wall in such a massive terror, I thought I was going to pass out. I waited for 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe 5. I really don't know how long. All I heard was silence. I couldn't stand just sitting and waiting, so I made a break for my house. I was only a block away, but it seemed like I was running the entire length of the town. I busted through the front door of my porch and stopped dead in front of the house door. At eye level, the dagger was clipped on the welcome sign in its shield. With tears in my eyes, I quietly but frantically checked every room where my family was sleeping and shut off all the lights. The doors definitely got locked that night, and I sat upright on the couch in the darkness, staring out the window, jolting at every noise inside the house. I didn't sleep for a week. I never went out alone at night again, and I still have the dagger somewhere to this day. I live in a sad tourist hotspot called Death's Door by the locals. Growing up, you start to become desensitized by the weird things that happen here. But I'll get to that later. The county that I live in recently was featured as the best vacation spot in 2019 for some magazine I don't remember that my boss told me. It's true, my hometown gets as many as 2 million visitors that its sad population of 1,000 something barely covers the minimum amount of workers needed to maintain its popularity. As a kid, I had a job to do before I even could process it. But that's just how it works. We maintain this lifestyle until we become the old people who retire and decide to succumb to God's siren call that is death in this shitty wasteland. Don't get me wrong, this place is pretty great if you can drink and enjoy your 500th sunset in a row. But for bored high schoolers like me, it gets old pretty quick, especially when everyone leaves in the fall and you are left with nothing to do and no one to talk to. That leads me to the start of my story. Being a kid in high school is hard, especially when you're the only girl in a set of triplets. I'll spare you the details, but I decided to stray away from my usual cleaning of hotel rooms for my aunt and look for a different job to get away from my life. That's what led me to my current job, an outdoor staff at my local bike store. I had seen commercials of the place at the local outdoor theatre, and it was only 5 minutes walk from my house. 3 minutes are for the walk down my driveway. I had met the owners at a job fair in my school, and after an interview was hired. Many weird things have happened at the shop, but for the sake of the story, I'll only explain some of the things in the woods. My job consisted of setting people up on the right size bikes, connecting burly carts, and attaching these damn things called tag-alongs that are a pain in the ass to use. I usually had 2 other outdoor staff with me, and we liked to hide away in the bike garage and goof off. Now, being a relatively small young girl going into my sophomore year in high school, it really didn't seem like I would be a good fit for the job. But I loved it. I had always been an active kid, and being around my brothers my whole life gave me an advantage when conversing with my mostly male co-workers. One co-worker is particular that I was close to. I'll name him E. Had recently got accepted to a college my cousins went to, so we would talk to each other about that and other things. I had met E during school, the play and sports, but never really talked to him. Just a friendly hello or occasional question. Now, the thing to remember about E is that he is more than a foot taller than me. He's a 6'8", kind of skinny kid with a messy head of blonde hair to top it off. I once walked into the garage when the lights were off and almost shit myself when I saw him in the door frame. Despite his stature though, this kid can run. I sometimes work at a woodyard in the park after work, and he ran there to say hi. It was almost 4 freaking miles in and less than half an hour after his shift. Our athletic abilities and need for competition is, I guess, what led to the bet. He had biked the whole bike route in 35 minutes. Most of our customers take around an hour in a half or 2 hours to finish the trails, considering that it's a 10-mile loop. My need to be the best took over, and I spent the whole summer trying to beat his record. Long story short, it was a tie, but it did lead to my eventual love of biking. The trails that we advertise to bikers are usually a type of crushed limestone and run either along the side of a cliff near a road or by the shore. I usually take some back roads before entering the park, but the weird things always happen in or around the park. When I would bike in the summer, it was always small things. A black squirrel almost running into your bike, a chewed up snake in the path, deer with weird marks on their body. The most unsettling would be the vanishing footprints. When it would rain, the trails would become mush, and you would be able to make indents and footprints easily. Sometimes after a big rainstorm, you could see these random footprints that would start out of nowhere and end the same way. I tried to convince myself that they probably just got caught in the rain and that's why they just start, but it doesn't explain why they end suddenly or why I saw them at the beginning of the loop when for sure I didn't see them when I entered. Most of the time, I didn't think anything about it because there were always people nearby. In the summer, the trails were never empty. That was until the fall came and all shiz went loose. At first, it was the cats. On the side roads by the park one day biking, I could see a lump on the side with flies swarming around it. Roadkill wasn't unusual, but the huge chunk of the cat missing was. It looked like something huge must have taken a bite of it, but it wasn't clean. Most animal bites have some level of cleanliness due to coyotes or whatever predators having sharp teeth. But no, this thing or whatever it was seemed to have a hard time chewing through. You could see multiple bite marks, like it kept biting down till it came off. As unsettling as that was already, I wish I could say that was the last time I saw them. Out of all the weird things biking through, the smiling people are what made me quit. They come in different forms, I've noticed. My first time was a tourist looking for direction in the woods, but by far the scariest encounter was by the graveyard. It was around early October when it had just started to get dark around 5 o'clock. I had wanted to get in one last bike ride before it would be crowded again for Halloween, and because it was my last day of work for the season. As tribute to the bike shop, I was going to bike the trails again. Even E had come back from college for the weekend to celebrate the end of the season. My normal trail brought me back by the local graveyard. I usually took this route because it was faster and because it had a hill going up and I liked to challenge myself with. I was never really bothered by the graveyard as both my grandparents and other relatives were buried there. Even some of E's relatives were buried there, as he had once told me he goes to visit them on his runs. It was getting darker, so I had decided to turn on my backlight, but it was still light enough that I could see vague figures and shapes. Most people like to put these solar-powered little lights by their family graves, and I was looking through the rows to see if I could spot the one I had put by my grandma. I was still on the road looking over when around 50 feet away, I could see a tall, skinny figure standing at the end of the row, staring into the tree line. From where I was, it kind of looked like E. I mean, the height was about right, maybe a little bit taller. But where else could it be? I knew most of the locals, and none of them looked like that. So I just kind of assumed maybe he was here to visit a gravesite. Mistake number 1. Hey E, what are you doing here? I thought you had to go back. Mistake number 2. It was like something clicked in my mind as I said those words. I was broken out of some sort of trance, or whatever those effers are. For some reason, they always seem familiar. It's like they want you to talk to them, acknowledge them, invite them. I didn't even realize how ridiculous I was being until it was too late. Why the F would E be out here this late in the first place? He sometimes visits his relatives, but why wouldn't he come with family? Especially if it was a big enough deal that he had to stay back from returning to college. Where was his car? I knew personally that he hated to run at night. It was like I was numb to all the warning signs until I had opened my mouth. Then it all came rushing back with a new sense of fear. I had always been the one to not get scared easily. I would smile at the jump scares in horror movies, but the amount of sheer panic I felt as that thing turned around could kill a man. If my mind was fuzzy before, it had now become hyper-focused at what was happening before me. It still haunts me to this day from what I could make out in the dark. It had an exaggerated grin, stretching so wide it looked painful. Its mouth looked almost fake, like one of those photos dentists show their clients on pamphlets. But instead of a mouth full of healthy teeth. Its teeth were yellow and rotting. Its eyes were glassed over, grey, like the kind that only appear when a body has been dead for a while. You could see them reflecting in the light of my bike light, but they never blinked. They stared straight forward at me. I don't know how to describe these things. Sometimes they look like normal people, but once you talk to them, it's like they lose the facade. You start to notice the flaws in their disguise. I started to notice that whatever was in front of me was definitely not human. Hey E! At this point, I was so scared. I didn't even think about running away. Whatever this thing is just copied what I had said. It didn't even say it in its own way. It copied my voice. I could smell the stench of its breath as it repeated that phrase over and over, like it was mocking me. Its breath was so hurried, it caused tears to form in my eyes. I could taste the bile at the back of my throat, but I forced it down and kept staring back, afraid of what would happen if I looked away. Its breath smelled like death. Even from a distance, I could smell the putrid stench of rotten meat. I can still taste the metallic aftertaste it left in my mouth. Nonetheless, I stared it down. It felt as though I was trapped in place, petrified with fear. Finally, it stopped yelling. Instead, it took a step towards me. In that single step, it moved around 10 feet. I think it moving broke some kind of spell in me, because in an instant, I started pedaling away as fast as I could. I think my survival instincts took over as I peeled my gaze to the trail and pedaled away. But I was still far away from the park and roads, and more than a mile away from the main road. The hill on the way out of the cemetery didn't help. Once I got to the top, I finally turned around and still pedaling to see if it was following me. I shiz you not, I turned around and this thing is effing sprinting at me. I could see its arm moving back and forth as it moved at an impossible pace. If I hadn't been on a bike, I would have been caught by then. I don't want to think about what would have happened then. Seeing this thing sprint at me made me go into overdrive. I don't ever think I have biked that fast in my life. Just as I went down the hill that led to the park road, I saw a car headed for me. I didn't have time to react, as my bosses pulled by and shoved me in the car. At this point, I didn't even care that my bike was still in the middle of the road. As we turned around and booked it, through the window I could see the thing standing at the top of the hill I had came down, still smiling. On the drive back, I didn't even care how my bosses knew to come get me, or what that thing was. They told me that they would get my bike for me in the morning, and that I should never bike alone again. And when my bike was parked in front of my house the next day, I didn't question it. Sometimes I feel like it's better to not know. I am still recovering from the whole ordeal, but one thing is for sure. Do not go biking alone at night. Well guys, thank you all for listening. I hope these 5 stories frightened you and scared you and made you think about driving, walking alone or staying alone. You always should have someone with you. I will see you again very soon. And always remember, the darkness always follows.